Welcome to a bit of a gloomy day here in Victoria, British Columbia, and I want to take today to ask you, how are you dealing with your transition? So first of all, I just want to apologize for my voice. I've spent the past weekend getting laryngitis, so I'm just recovering from it now. That's why I'm a little slow on the videos this week, so I apologize for that, but let's roll into it. So on Friday, before I lost my voice, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. This friend of mine is on the road to release, but it's a bit like a car crash, a slow motion car crash, in that it's happening very slowly. There's no doubt that at some point he will release medically because of his situation, but the process for it is just taking a very, very long time. Now that's very fortunate because he's going through kind of the process of having to deal with letting go of the military, and it made me think, as I was speaking to him, we were talking about the uniform and the kind of feeling we get from it, made me think about my experience. Now, December 21st, 2016 was my last day in uniform. And really, I'd returned all my kit well ahead of that, but I showed up that day, went into the base orderly room to go through my paperwork and officially walk out. Now that whole process for me was a big deal. I was very sensitive and emotional on that day. And in fact, as soon as I came out after officially signing my release, I came out and I ran into my former P1 bosun who was on my ship with me on my last deployment, my last posting, HMCS Winnipeg. Now he was now the buffer, or the chief petty officer second class, aboard the same ship, and it was great to see him, and I celebrated his success, congratulated him, and inevitably in those kinds of interactions he asked me how I was doing or where I was at. And that's when I broke down. I couldn't hold it in. It was very unexpected, and I just started crying. And it had nothing to do with him as much as it was in that moment when I was speaking to the buffer, the chief bosun mate, that moment, and he was in his DEUs, he was in his dress uniform, and it represented everything that I was saying goodbye to in that moment. And I was struck, I was overwhelmed emotionally by what I was letting go. When I was talking to my friend on the Friday, we talked about, the pride we get in the uniform, our purpose, our identity, our sense of self that we get whenever we put on that uniform. And I had that until the very last day when I had to turn it in. I had invested so much of myself, so much of my identity, so much of my self-worth in that uniform and who I was when I was wearing it, that when I had to leave it behind, it was almost like it was a traumatic event for me, because it was like I was ripping out a part of me. And for me, you may be voluntarily releasing, or you may be involuntarily releasing, as was my case because of an injury. I had to medically step aside and retire. And because that choice was taken away from me, because I didn't have the option to stay on, it was very hard for me. And I had a very difficult time, especially in that moment. In the months leading up to that moment, I had a plan. I was in the midst of upgrading my education. I knew it was coming. I had a lot of foresight that this was the path that I was going down. And I was very well prepared. I'd returned all my stuff. Administratively, nothing was an issue. I had contacted all the right people to make sure that pensions and various things started happening when I left, and all those pieces were lined up. What I wasn't ready for was that emotional moment with the buffer, the chief bosun mate, in the parking lot of the BOR. It caught me off guard. I was totally unprepared for that moment. And that's why I ask you, how are you dealing with your release? One of the things that came up in my conversation with my friend on Friday was that you need to craft for yourself a new sense of identity. So in my case, so much of who I was and how I perceived my own worth was tied into my role as a naval officer. I wore that uniform, I played that role. I even joke, even today, that I was Captain Kirk in training, and that's kind of the best way to describe what I did. But once that is gone and that part of you has to be set aside, who are you going to be? What are you going to do? And where are you going to find the sense of reward in your life? Now, the military is not the only place that you're going to find this. Of course, anyone who retires from their working life, their career, has to struggle with this identity that they've had to put aside, and finding the new sense of purpose, their new sense of reward, and how do they value themselves. So I don't want to imply that this is particularly or only unique to the military, but when it comes to us, and when we step aside or retire from the military, we lose our community, we lose our sense of self and identity, or at least that was my experience. And to struggle through that, to find a way past that, is a very important piece of your transition journey. So over the next couple days, I'm going to be sharing with you my lessons learned, my journey, the experience that I've gone through, and the successes that I'm having, also where I've fallen down, and hopefully all of that will be able to help you be more successful in your military transition.